Hello and welcome. I'm joined by Pox Populi, and we're going to talk about a few stories that have been in the news in the last week or so. We'll start off with a story about a guy in London who's getting up to all sorts of mischief. Mischief is probably not the word, but we'll go with that for now. Pox, you're very welcome.
Hello, good to speak with you again. Always a pleasure.
So I'll just start off by saying this guy called Mizzy, I'd never heard of him. I'm never on TikTok and on Twitter. Yeah, about a week ago, I started seeing people putting up videos of his. And in one of them, for example, it was the first one I saw. He was with some other guy, as far as I know, and they just walked up to a house. It looked like a middle-class neighborhood. And they walked into the house. And it was so strange. They walked in, there was nobody there, but you could hear the voices of a husband and wife. And then the husband, I think he's coming down the stairs, and he looked actually quite calm. And he was saying to the guys, I have kids in here, come on. And they go into the sitting room and sit down, and then eventually they leave. And I just thought to myself, that's such a, I know when boys are young, like I'm talking 12 or 13, they'll get up to shenanigans. But the idea of walking into people's houses to try and scare them, like it just seemed really strange. And then the other one I saw was he was in a park. There was an elderly woman with a dog. She was sitting on a bench, and he started talking to her about her dog. And I don't know if he asked if he could pet the dog or something, but the next clip is him running in the park with the dog under his arm, and he's giggling that he's stolen the elderly woman's dog. And I'll just mention the other ones I've seen, and then Pox can chime in then. So the next one I saw it looked like it was in a metro. He was on a platform, and he walked over to these, I think there were 3 young white women, and he's standing over them. He's quite menacing in this video by the looks of it, and I think he's asking them if they want to die, and he's stroking their hair as he says it. And these girls are just completely frozen to their seats. So that was weird. And yeah, there are probably 2 other videos. I think he jumped on a Jew. I think that's what really landed him in hot water. He like jumped on the back of a Jew, I think an Orthodox Jew, as if he was going to ride him with a whip. And yeah, so Pox, what do you make of this guy, Mizzy? What do you make of these videos? And well, I guess it's a redundant question, but I'll ask it nonetheless. Do you think a lot of people in this ethnic group, shall we say, this socioeconomic group, do you think they're going to start getting inspiration from this guy and imitating him, to get likes, to get clout on social media?
Well, let me just say, first of all, that there's a lot to unravel in this seemingly, meaningless bit of current thing. This will fade into oblivion very quickly. No one's going to remember this in probably 2 weeks' time. But there is, in fact, a lot of significance in this story. And also, really quickly, I would just like to rebuff any of the typical defenses of Mizzy's behavior. And I will say that there are, as you mentioned, young people, preteens, teenagers, who get up to all sorts of shenanigans. There are, especially nowadays with the constant pursuit for internet fame, there are plenty of examples of this, including white kids doing the same, or similar acts. Talking about going to people's houses. When I was a kid, it was common enough to pull a prank on someone's house by ringing the doorbell and then running off. Okay, so kids do things like this. So one of the things that Mizzy's defenders have been saying is it's not a race issue. Why are you bringing race into it? I will explain why it is a race issue. But it is true that, yeah, white kids do this too, but they don't do what Mizzy has done. And the level of delinquency and the level of threatening, the criminality that's involved in this is not typical of when white youngsters pull pranks like TPing a house or ringing the doorbell and then running off. Now, the racial component comes into this because if you were to take all of these examples, you mentioned the one of going into the house, and just to add a bit more color to these so-called pranks, the one where he and his mates, I think there's about 5 of them, they're all wearing hoodies. They've all got their hoodies pulled up. You know, they're wearing the typical, you know, tracksuit uniform of the London youth. They go into this home of a young couple, and the young couple perform fantastically. It's amazing how calm they are, because this is actually quite a terrifying thing to imagine going through, regardless of the race, but particularly because of the race. Knowing the criminality of this group, especially in London, where I think it's like, you know, it's ironic, but it's similar to despite being 13% of the American population, you know, in London, it's curiously the same number. Despite being 13% of the London population, the black population of London accounts for about 60% of the crime, of the violent crime. And, you know, of course, everyone in London, I'm sure, just as many people around the world are aware of the knife crime epidemic in big cities like London. So you have 5 young black men, you know, waltz into this home of a young couple who have children, young children. And you can hear the woman's voice when she says to her husband, James, come here right now, please. And he comes up the stairs and he's like, what's going on? Guys, what are you doing? I've got kids. What are you doing? And the Mizzy imitates the wife's voice. James. And he starts asking these questions. He starts doing the prank is like, you know, I think he even asks if this is the house of some name or other. He's acting as if he's walked into the wrong house, which, given what happened in America a few months ago, where a so-called scholar rang the wrong doorbell, you know, and got shot because, you know, the person inside the home, an elderly white man, took it as an intruder. This is all just very, very bad news. Then you've got the situation on the platform of that tube station. He's touching the girl's hair, which is funny because black people often have this fantasy that they're always being, you know, encroached upon by whites who touch their hair without permission. And so that's never happened. I've never known any white person who wants to touch black people's hair without permission. But here we see a black kid touching these white girls' hair, stroking their head. And he says repeatedly, do you want to die? And the girl, it's funny, the reaction of the girl who he's asking, it's like she doesn't know how to respond or like fully take it in. She just responds very nonchalantly, no. And then he says again, I don't think you know how serious I'm being. Do you want to die? Just unbelievable behavior on display there. And so what's interesting about this is that if you were to ask a sort of right-wing white nationalist to write a fiction, a sort of allegory, a short story, encompassing, you know, metaphorically, everything that he considers to be an injustice and a hypocrisy of modern world, of living in a multiracial, multicultural society, this is exactly what you'd expect him to write, because it has everything. Here you have a black delinquent filming himself for internet fame, harassing, threatening, and even, you know, like you said with the example of the elderly woman and the dog, you know, stealing from white people. I think there's another video which I didn't watch with the volume on. I just couldn't be bothered. But I think there's one where he even gets like some white cuck Englishman to like run away in fear and I think he drops his phone in fear because he thinks he's being mugged for his phone. There's another one where he just walks into a man's car. A man is parked in the street. Mizzy walks into his car, pretends it's an Uber, starts acting like if this is his Uber driver. And the man is like, "What are you doing in my car? Get out of my car. I'm not an Uber driver." And Mizzy actually gets very angry, starts shouting at him. He's like, "Yes, you are. You're my Uber. Drive." And the guy's like, he doesn't even know what to do. He starts getting a bit aggressive, getting angry, defending himself, trying to get this boy out of his car. So this is even bordering on potential violence. And he's targeting white people, vulnerable white people. You never see any video of Mizzy, going up to a group of construction workers on their lunch break, having a smoke and a chat on their lunch break. You don't see any of that. You don't see him approaching, tall, broad-shouldered white men. No, he's going into young people's homes with children. He's targeting old ladies, young girls, and the only time he gets in trouble, when he finally gets caught, when he's finally, runs afoul of the law, it's because he targeted a Hasidic Jew. I believe the prank in that case was to leapfrog over him. And that was what did him in. So all this abuse of white people went completely ignored, but the only time he gets in trouble is because he goes after this other protected class. Which is, again, if you had to ask a white nationalist to write a short story about all the hypocrisies and injustices that he has to put up with, this would be perfect. And then the government steps in, the totalitarian, anti-white, anti-English government steps in. Now that Mizzy's in trouble because of the virality of his videos, and particularly because he targeted the Jews, which I assume he probably thought were just, another form of white people. Then the government comes in and says that, and rather than cracking down on delinquency like this, rather than cracking down on Mizzy himself, their concern is to crack down on these kinds of videos online. They don't want you to see this kind of content, and they don't want this content to be uploaded on social media platforms. That's their concern. And so this is all dovetailing perfectly with this totalitarian government's desire to pass an online harms bill, which really is just going to restrict dissent and the freedom of English people to read and see what they want and say what they want online. And then, finally, the culprit himself gets a slap on the wrist and then put on one of the country's most popular television programs to be interviewed by Piers Morgan and get more fame and more recognition and defend himself and play the victim and say that I'm being targeted and attacked because I'm black. Everything about this, it's just so predictable. But it's like, if you had to ask a white nationalist, write me a story about all of the madness and hypocrisy and injustice that is occurring in your world, this would be it. This is like a perfect example.
Yeah, there is another video we didn't mention, and I'm guessing you've seen it. He goes into a library, and his plan is he will go in, he will just
he'll
pick up a random book, he'll go up to the librarian, and he'll start tearing pages out of it. And he does it. And not only does he do it, she just leaves. She's scared, so she goes into the back room and he follows her.
Yeah.
And he continues
he's incredibly
tearing the book.
intimidating. He's quite tall, even though he's very thin. He looks more like a Somali woman than he does, an NBA player or something like that. He's very thin and gangly, but he's quite tall, and he's taller than this sort of pudgy librarian woman, certainly.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can see that, and you see this in all of his videos. Like it's generally white people, and they seem to be middle class generally, and you can see they're absolutely helpless. Obviously, if you're an elderly woman in a park, you are helpless. If a youth comes and grabs your dog and runs off, you're not going to be able to do anything there. You're not going to be able to get your dog back. You're not going to be able to outsprint him. Then you have the girls, young girls, on the platform, in the metro, and in the librarian. These are kind of middle-aged or elderly women, and you can just see by all of them, their faces, that they can't do anything and they can't say anything either, because this guy is a minority and he's protected. And you see that in the library. The woman, she's obviously scared. Then he follows them in. He follows her in, and there's another woman.
Yeah, she takes her key card. So it's a strange setup. It's one of these modern libraries that have like plexiglass, covered desks and key fobs and everything. It's all like that kind of thing. And he walks up to this librarian's desk and starts ripping the pages of this book. And she immediately reacts by getting up and taking her key card, like a hotel key card, and scanning it in front of this door and walking in there. And he just walks behind her. So it's almost like maybe she was going to just retreat away from this intimidating black fellow. But he doesn't let it happen. He follows her. And then his mate that's filming this for TikTok, follows him. And in this space behind this, employees only door, another librarian, I think, or might have been the same one, I don't quite remember, but she actually does try to take the book that he's ripping out of his hands, and I think she might even succeed in that. And then what's very interesting is that one of these female librarians asks for a male librarian to come in and help them. I think that says quite a lot. It says a lot about how some things never change, and when the going gets tough, all of a sudden the white man is in fact necessary, and women do in fact need men in their lives and in society, because they had no chance. Not only could they not say anything because he's a protected minority, but also, even if he was a white boy doing this, the fact that he is a good head taller than them and going to have 90% more upper body strength, and he's acting intimidating. Well, of course, these upper class, middle class, probably progressive feminist women are suddenly calling upon the help of the only white man in that library, or in that particular part of the library, to come and help them.
There is a tweet I saw today from Keith Woods, and I thought it was spot on. I'm just going to read it out. He said, "Conservative outlet blames a retreat of the grown-ups and the snowflake generation for enabling Mizzy. Absent from their analysis is, number one, most people reasonably assumed he had a knife. Black Londoners are 13% of the London population, but 61% of the knife murder perpetrators. Number two, Britain has a two-tier justice system, and white people expect anarcho-tyranny. Mizzy got a £350 fine after entering someone's house and stealing a dog. The same week, a disabled podcaster got 2.5 years in jail for using offensive words." And he continues. I think there's a second one here. And then he quotes from the London Assembly. "Despite making up only 13% of London's total population, Black Londoners account for 45% of London's knife murder victims, 61% of knife murder perpetrators, and 53% of knife crime perpetrators." So he's quoting it from one of the official sources. But anyway, yeah, that is a case. As I said, these victims, in these TikTok videos, you can see they're helpless, not only physically but mentally. They can't do anything because this is a minority, and they know that they are, I would say, the lowest caste in English
and
society.
this is why the racial element is important. Like I said in my sort of preamble, the people who would say that race has nothing to do with this, it's just, youth delinquency, why bring race into it? You have to be an idiot not to understand why race is important here. This is a black young man targeting exclusively, to my knowledge. I've never seen a video of him targeting black people. I've been told that there's some that exist. I'm not surprised that, and at some point, given however many dozens or hundreds of these pranks he's recorded, he has to come across some non-white person. But the ones that have gone viral, the most, dastardly deeds have all been directed at white people. And for the reasons you just listed there from Keith Wood's tweet, and I kind of alluded them to as well, the racial element here is fundamental. You have a young black man targeting almost exclusively white people in a time where in England, you even had, the Black Lives Matter mania take that country by storm. You had Black Lives Matter written on the back of Premier League shirts for like months. Instead of putting the last names of the footballers, it said Black Lives Matter. You had them taking the knee. English football clubs, Scottish football clubs, countries literally an ocean away from where this thing with George Floyd happened, taking the knee in homage to this black victim of racism and oppression. Nowadays, people have to understand, and I'm sure most of them do, people who are listening to this do, that there is immense power in being the victim, in claiming victimhood status. And when you have a member of this very high-ranking victimhood class, this grievance grifting class, that gets treated with kid gloves, gets all this pampering and coddling, like I said, and institutional backing, the English Premier League, all these corporations, standing up for or kneeling down rather for Black Lives Matter and all this other stuff, and you have such anti-whiteism in England, and the whites in cities like London, the native English population have been reduced to a minority in London, in Birmingham, in Luton, and other places. They know that they really can't do anything, even if they wanted to. I mean, I'm sure survival instinct kicks in and overrides their cuckery and progressivism and shitlibbery. But let's imagine that these Londoners, these white native English Londoners, maybe they are a bit on the conservative side. Maybe they are a bit fed up with the diversity. Maybe they are a bit red pilled on these things. Well, then they would know even more that there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do against this protected class. And then, of course, as you read from Keith Wood's tweet, these Londoners are, I'm sure, aware that this black kid might be carrying a pretty long and lethal kind of knife. They're not just walking around with kitchen knives. I've seen videos where they're running around with basically machetes. And if you look at some of the pictures and other videos of this Mizzy and his crew, like, they are trying to pass themselves off as gangsters. This is black culture. This is the importation of American black gangster rap culture. And they're looking in the camera with these sort of like cross-eyed glares. I saw this one video that Mizzy put up. He's walking along the street and he's speaking into the camera. It's in a sort of like selfie mode, and he's got one of his nappy-haired mates behind him, and Mizzy's talking into the camera saying, I love it. I love all this attention. Every time people start complaining about my pranks, I get more impressions, more views. I love it. And his mate behind him is just glaring into the camera, just absolutely glaring with this, wannabe gangster look. So these people, Mizzy and his gang, are obviously trying to intimidate these helpless white people. And that's why the racial element is obviously important. and needs to be taken into consideration here. It obviously is playing a part. Yes, white kids do pranks too, but not with this level of intimidation and not with this level of racial dynamics. If white kids commit these kinds of pranks, scaled down, obviously, many degrees, ringing on a doorbell and running off, or, running into a library and making a bit of noise and then getting confronted by a librarian, okay? What would likely happen is that the librarian or the homeowner would confront the white, troublemakers, confront them, give them a stern talking to, and the white kids would either bow their heads in shame or, say, yeah, okay, we get it, and just run off and try and escape punishment. But there would be a confrontation. But with blacks doing this, there is no chance for that. Absolutely not. Because the white kids, they're not going to be carrying knives. And the white kids aren't a protected class. You can confront them. You can give them a stern talking to. None of that applies with these black kids.
Well, you said it at the very start that, when he hopped into the back seat of that guy's car, that could have very easily escalated. And the driver, when he got him out of the car and the Mizzy fellow was shouting in his face, that driver could easily have just punched him. And then he would be in trouble. He would be in prison.
Absolutely.
So, another thing I noticed is, you mentioned, that he was on this Piers Morgan. I haven't watched it. I have no intention of watching it. But, he's getting, obviously, the irony is we're talking about him as well, which, doesn't give him a lot more kudos.
No, I'm totally fine with this. I'm totally fine with this, mate.
Yeah.
I'm happy. People are saying, oh, don't give him oxygen. Don't give him attention. No. Give him attention. I'm so thrilled. I hope he continues making these kinds of videos and pranks. I 100% support him. I hope he continues, because every time he does, a new racist is born. A new racist is made. A based and red-pilled angel gets its wings. I love this, because the more and more that this is done and recorded and put online and spread everywhere, the more people will see that this cannot continue. This is an absolute failure of multicultural and multiracial societies. It's an absolute failure, and also it's another symptom of the completely hollowed out moral framework of our society. It's a symptom of social media rotting our spirits and our minds. The pursuit for clout and fame, like all of this needs to be addressed, but particularly this racial dynamic of untouchable black people all over the world, wherever you plop them, behaving the same, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the Netherlands, whether it's in Italy, or whether it's in Britain. They all behave the same. The gangster rap culture, the gangster rap videos, the animal abuse, the criminality, the violence. I want more and more people to see this. I think it's great. So I don't care about giving him more oxygen. He already has the fame. He already got the attention. Well, now let it be negative attention. Let it be people criticizing him. Let it be people having, just no other escape routes anymore. We have to address this. We have to address the fact that blacks think they can do whatever they want, especially towards white people and, Asians in America as well. So I'm all for it. I don't mind.
Well, he is, yeah. He's getting the acclaim he so desperately sought. He actually, you've already mentioned this, he's constantly in his videos, but like videos of him being arrested, he's looking at the camera at all times. It's like a desperate need to get attention. And now that kind of leads on to another thing. Some people are saying, this is a psyops. This guy comes from nowhere and suddenly he's on the Piers Morgan show.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you thought about that.
Yeah, there's a video as well. Like it does look a bit weird.
Yeah.
Where there's a woman police officer, and she's not wearing any socks, and I don't know if she's in some sort of slippers, shoes, or whatever. But
Yeah.
she, like, when the video starts, she's just standing like a statue, holding him by the elbow.
Mhm.
And there's like a 1 second where they're just standing there, and then they begin walking up the steps or
Yeah,
whatever.
almost as if someone yells action.
Exactly. So there is something very fishy about it. At the same time, as you said, this will certainly remove the scales from people's eyes. This idea that there's equality and that race isn't important, multiculturalism is great. Videos like this show that is not the case at all. Now we should move on.
I just want to say, to the point of that being a psyop, I do want to sympathize with people who have that notion. I don't think it's entirely wrong-headed, especially given what we've lived through and we've learned over the past few years. I mean, it's always like a chicken and egg type of question here. Is it that this is a psyop, and let's kind of remember what that means. Basically, it's like a false flag. It's a situation created by the powers that be in a certain context, whatever that means. In this case, let's say the British government. It's a fake, staged sort of scandal or crisis, or it could be a terrorist attack, whatever, that needs to happen. The powers that be need this thing to occur in order to use it as justification for something they already want to do. In this case, pass this online harms bill. Or is it that this is an organic occurrence and the powers that be are seizing upon it, taking advantage of it, and in order to accomplish that objective of what they want, in this case, passing the online harms bill? Because it's also true that the counter argument to this being a psyop is, I've seen people mocking the idea that it's a psyop, saying, right, sure, it's a psyop. It's definitely not the fact that blacks feel immune, act with impunity, are incredibly delinquent, and love to pick on white people. No, it can't be that. Surely not. Which is a good point. I do believe that this could be, 50-50. It could be a psyop, but it also could easily just be another case of black delinquency and, sort of bad behavior specifically towards white people, of course. But it is worth noting how easily this has been, I would say, channeled into justifying the online harms bill. Remember, the government's reaction to this, the police reaction to this, hasn't been to crack down on delinquent blacks, stealing old ladies' dogs and running into people's houses and walking into people's cars and that sort of thing. The reaction has been, we need to curtail these delinquents' ability to post it online, which I think is very interesting.
It could be a case that, it's organic, but the government has seen that they can now use this and astroturf it as for their own means. So it might have started out with a guy looking for clout online, wanting, typical braggart, and the government has seen this and said, wait a minute, we can use this now to our advantage. We should move on, Pox, to this other story. And I saw the video. It was a woman. She was very upset. She was arguing with a black guy. I think there were 4 or 5 of them present, and it was over a bicycle. And she was saying that she had rented the bicycle, and they were saying, no, we rented the bicycle. And at some stage, she cries. I don't know if there are tears or not. Some people are saying she cried, but there were no tears, and she was trying to kill these innocent black people with her crocodile tears. She was trying to get them killed. I think she's 6 months pregnant.
Not with her crocodile tears, with her white tears, with her Karen
white tears. Right. Even worse than crocodile tears, white tears. So yeah. What do you make of this anyway? This story?
Oh yeah, it's just one of the umpteenth examples of what we have to live with anywhere that we have these multiracial societies. It occurs more often in the States. It's occurring now very frequently as well in European countries, given the rate of mass migration from Africa. I thought this was a disgusting story. I just thought everything about it was extremely blackpilling, demoralizing, and disgusting. I didn't even watch the video until rather recently because I just didn't want. I could tell, you see these videos going around on Twitter, and if you don't click the video, and you have your sound on your phone is off or whatever, you don't have to put up with the sound. I didn't want to listen to her cries. I didn't want to listen to the inane hooping and hollering of the blacks. I could already hear it. I've seen enough of this to know exactly what it sounds like, and I didn't want to hear it. But eventually, I did catch a few snippets of it with the audio on, and they are surrounding her. They're laying hands on her. She is being basically put into a claustrophobic situation where she's pressed up against the bike, and she's got these black, again, young black men, taller than her, stronger than her, surrounding her on all sides. And she is simply trying to get the bicycle away from the bike stand onto the pavement so she can go away. And she is saying, basically, please stop, help, someone help. She's kind of like saying it in a sort of like annoyed, nonchalant way. She's just not, it's not very dramatic. It's not like a Hollywood cry for help. It's sort of just like this, is anyone seeing this? Please help, hello, right? And they always say in a city like New York, scream fire is the best way to actually get someone to help you. But of course, you can't scream fire outdoors at a bike kiosk. So, she's crying out for help, but in this sort of, toned down way. And then as the blacks get closer and they're not relenting and they're trying to take the bike from her and they're shouting and it's all inane babbling, she kind of does this, I think it was more of just like her, her feeling of being overwhelmed. This happens, children do this, and women are kind of overgrown children sometimes, where they get so emotional and so frustrated that they just close their eyes really tightly and kind of start to cry. But there's no tears. It's just this, over pouring of emotion, of built up emotion that's now overflowing. And so that's what she kind of does, is she kind of closes her eyes tightly and starts to make crying gestures and motions, because I think she felt just completely stressed, overwhelmed, and desperate. And this goes viral, and the reaction is typical. She's called a Karen, which at this point has become an anti-white slur. I don't use it. I've very rarely used it. I don't think I've ever really. I don't care about white middle-class women behaving like these Karens. I don't really care if a video goes viral of a woman demanding to speak to the manager at a clothes shop. I don't care. So I've never really gone around saying, oh, look at this Karen. But now I will never ever use it, ever, because it has become just an anti-white slur. It's a derogatory slur directed at only one race: white people. So Black Twitter, shit libs, blue checks, journos, the usuals, they all start calling her Karen. And the anti-white mob is whipped up into another frenzy, and they go after her. And they try to dox her. They dox her husband. I think they actually did dox her successfully. The usual consequences are she suffers the usual consequences. She's laid off from her position as a nurse at this hospital in New York City. She's also, I think, like several months pregnant, this woman. So what the anti-white mob wanted us to believe is that a several months pregnant little white woman tried to steal a bike from 5 black men. Again, it's just the complete inversion of reality that we're supposed to believe. The fact is, I mean, it's a meme at this point. Everyone knows blacks steal bikes. And yet here we're supposed to believe it's a petite, pregnant white woman stealing bikes from blacks. And so, yeah, her life is ruined, or the attempt to ruin it is made, and very nearly, successful. I'm sure. I think she actually did have to go into hiding, go to another address. Who knows if she'll ever get her job back, if they'll ever take her back. They should, because it turns out she literally has the receipts. She did rent the bike. And there were a few black Twitterers like the infamous Tariq Nasheed and some other odious woman, black woman whose name I don't remember. It was one of those ridiculous African names, black American names that I don't even bother, trying to read or pronounce. But they both just drenched her with libel and defamation and instigated a hate mob against her. And when it came out that she had the receipts and she did rent the bike and that bike was hers to use and the blacks were trying to take it from her illegitimately, well, Tariq Nasheed doubles down and says, yeah, but her white tears could have got those men killed, and that's the behavior of a white supremacist, and I stand by that conviction. So again, just like racism has over the past 10 years of it being overused by the shit libs, the libtards, if you go back all the way pre-Trump YouTube blood sports era, this was already happening, that the term racism just became meaningless. Well, now they're going to do that with white supremacy. It's just such a meaningless term. If it's white supremacy for a white woman being accosted to break down and cry, then I really don't give a fuck about what white supremacy is. Like, whatever these people think it is, I just don't care. If you're going to say that it's white women crying while being accosted by multiple black men, that's white supremacy? What a ridiculous notion. Like, it's just, we shouldn't have to live like this. It's so stupid. But again, the racial dynamic here is undeniable. In the first place, a group of white men would probably never behave like this, try and forcibly take a bicycle off of a pregnant white nurse. But even if it did, this reaction would be impossible. There would be no hate mob whipped up into doxing her and trying to ruin her life and accusing her of being a white supremacist for breaking down in tears. It would just be a video of some assholes accosting a woman. In fact, the reaction would be, let's find out who these white guys are and dox them and get them, press charges against them, identify them. Who are these guys who are going around trying to rob a pregnant white nurse of her bicycle? So again, anyone who's saying, why are you bringing race into it? Because it's obviously a fundamental part of everything that went down.
It's amazing to think, that a woman who's 6 months pregnant, I think she's come off a shift at the hospital. I could be wrong. I think this is what I heard anyway.
No, you're right. She's right. I don't know if it's 6 months pregnant, but somewhere around there. And she had just come off work. She had just finished a shift at work.
Yeah, she'd been at work. So she's probably tired. And, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe she was going to work, or maybe it wasn't anything to do with work. But as far as I know, from what I've heard, she had finished a 12-hour shift or something like that at this hospital where she works as a nurse. I mean, imagine that, right? Imagine you've worked 12 hours, and I'm, after COVID and everything, I'm not one to venerate nurses or whatever. It's such a hard job. Maybe it is. I don't care anymore after what so many nurses did and how they behaved with all those dance routines and everything. But whatever. 12 hours is a long time to be working no matter what. Okay, so you've done 12 hours. Plus you're pregnant. You're pregnant
you're
and
pregnant.
You're hormonal and you're tired.
Exactly. You've got life inside of you. Your protective instincts then are going to be really on edge as well. That's worth noting. You finish your 12 hours, you leave the hospital, you walk across the street to the bike kiosk where you typically rent a bike to cycle home in this godforsaken megalopolis that smells like piss called New York City. And on this particular day, instead of being able to do your usual routine, you get set upon by 5 black men who try to take the bike from you, claim that it's theirs. You say, no, it's mine. You call out for help. They record you, put the video online, and your life gets ruined. I just imagine we shouldn't have to live like this.
But this is the thing, Pox. The fact that they were videoing this, they were getting a thrill out of it.
Absolutely.
And they
it
wanted
goes back
other
to the
people.
Mizzy thing. They know that they wanted can get away
people.
with this.
Yeah, they wanted other people to get a thrill out of watching it. And you mentioned the word Karen. This word came out, was it about 2 years ago? It was a woman in New York. I think she was in a park, and there was some guy who was bird watching. Whatever happened, I don't know if her name, I think it's possible her name was Karen, and the whole thing started then. It's like an obnoxious...
No, this goes back a bit farther. Karen goes back farther. Karen goes back to this, I think you have women like this in Ireland, maybe not so much in Spain. You and I live in Spain, but I think you have these types of women in Ireland as well. But it's mainly this American middle-class white woman who has a particular type of haircut. It's kind of like the Rachel, only shorter, but like she's got fringe that kind of frames her face, and it's kind of big and like spiky-ish in the back. I don't really quite know. It's this typical haircut they have. They're very middle class. When I lived in the United States, there were plenty of women like this that were just existed. It was a very typical look. It was a very typical behavior. The Karen is an American middle-class white woman who has this kind of look, and the behavior that she's stereotyped to constantly exhibit is like this demand for everything being catered to her, and everything, all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. So like one of the typical memes was that Karen always, she's the kind of customer who asks to speak to the manager. You're just some wage cock slave working at, H&M, and she shows up with a pair of jeans that have been clearly worn multiple times, but now, there's a stain on them that she can't get out, and so she wants to return them and get her money back, and she's got no receipt, and so this poor, wage cock has to tell her, no, I'm sorry, we can't take back these jeans. And the Karen will, sort of get really bitchy and insult and ask to speak to the manager and demand that she get what she wants. That's kind of where it all came from. But then later it got put on basically any time a white woman expects proper behavior from other members of society, or anytime a white woman, reacts to bad behavior. So it could be a white woman telling or asking some youths to turn down their music, or not blow cigarette smoke in her baby's face. That's a Karen. That's a Karen. At any time a white woman now basically either stands up for herself or expects a modicum of civility and education and manners, that gets labeled a Karen. And the case you mentioned, again in New York City in Central Park from a few years ago, was a white woman walking her dog in Central Park. And this story also was just disgusting. And again, the lie runs around the world 3 times before the truth even laces up its shoes. And so this woman's life was ruined. Everyone called her a racist and a Karen. She actually had to undergo, re-education, basically. She was sent to a re-education camp to, brainwash out her racial biases because she was crying and, telling this black man who was filming her to leave her alone, go away. And her life was ruined because the anti-white mob doxed her and accused her of being a white supremacist and a Karen because her white tears could have got that black man killed. and she's a racist for, you know, reacting in such a way. It's just a black man, you know, all he was doing was trying to talk to her, and yet she reacts this way. Well, she's obviously a racist who hates blacks. Well, it turns out that before the black man started recording, he had told her something to the effect of, like, I'm gonna kill your dog, or something like that. Or like something rather off-putting and intimidating and threatening. And that's what made the woman have this reaction, just start saying, you know, go away, leave me alone, start crying. And she started screaming, because what else can a helpless white woman do except call for help? And that fundamental, that extremely relevant bit of information did not come out until it was too late. But yeah, that's another example of this sort of thing.
So, Pox, you can confirm then that the word Karen has been around for decades in the States.
I wouldn't say decades. It's been around. I feel like it's been around for at least 4 years. That's my impression. And
right.
It first started coming out because of these women who ask to see the manager. These women who, you know, blacks will shoot you if you get their order of hamburger and fries wrong. Whereas the Karen will be like, I want to speak to the manager. You put pickles on my hamburger, and I said no pickles. It's basically just a very, you know, nitpicky, hectoring, middle-class white woman.
Right. You have them in all countries.
Yeah.
So, right. This nurse then, as you said, she, you know, they doxed her, and I heard that she's terrified now for her life, and she may have gone into hiding. And I heard that the media, you know, some of the media, really fucked up the story, and they may be getting some sort of comeuppance now in the next year or so, because they doubled down on this. And as you said, she had the receipt.
Well, I haven't heard that. I hope that's true. The only way this is going to stop is if white people take it upon themselves to take legal action. We have to wage lawfare. You know, I say the only way it's going to stop. Actually, no, Scott Adams, aka the Dilbert guy, he's right. There is no fixing this. Just get the fuck away. But of course, if you live in a city like New York, and if you ever look at the demography of New York, it's astounding. It is quite possibly one of the least white cities on earth. It is incredibly not white. It's been completely overrun by non-whites. And so if you live in a city like New York, you can't just, I mean, you have to leave New York City if you don't want to deal with this, because otherwise there is no fixing it. But a small step towards fixing it would be that there has to be consequences. Now, obviously, blacks are not going to care about the consequences of their actions. They, you know, as a group, on the whole, seem to continuously demonstrate that they don't care about the consequences of their actions. But the media might, the journos might. So you get a few defamation lawsuits and you lose them. A few reputations get a bit bruised. If, you know, some hefty sums of money have to get paid, and that annoys some, you know, CEOs. That might do something to quell this. So I do hope that that's true.
Getting back briefly, you know, we mentioned all about the different videos from this Mizzy fella and how the victims, the hapless victims, they really don't know what to do, and they're terrified to do anything really. They just seem to suck it up. And there was a guy who decided not to suck it up on a metro. I think it was in New York as well. Mm-hmm. And this was, you know, the media were saying this guy, he just loved
Daniel
dancing.
Penny.
Yeah, I don't know his name, but he loved dancing like Michael Jackson. And
the name of the black vagrant is Jordan Neely. I love the irony of that last name, Jordan Neely. And then the name of the white man, former Marine, is Daniel Penny.
Do you think he's going to be dragged, you know, over the coals now? Because
I expect bad outcomes. That's why I never am disappointed. I don't get my hopes up. You know, it's a pretty grim way of living, but I don't expect positive outcomes. I imagine worst case scenarios and then even a little bit beyond that. So I expect Mr. Penny will suffer. He might go to jail. He might be fined or both, or some other form of punishment. I don't expect him to walk away from this unscathed. He should. I hope he does, of course, but I don't expect it.
If you were in a situation like this, and you do what you think is right, you try to defend people from maybe some guy who's having a psychotic episode, who's threatening to kill people or to kill himself. If you live to tell the tale, it might be behind bars for the rest of your life. So it's it's a screwed up system. We'll move on to this final part, Pox. Now you know a lot more about this than I. A Brazilian player, he plays in Spain. I've heard a little bit about it. I heard the Brazilian government was going to get involved. They were going to, I don't know, supersede Spanish law, Spanish jurisdiction to punish, the perpetrators of such a heinous crime. So, can you tell us about this?
Yeah, well, I suggested we tie this situation in Spain because we're kind of, country hopping and continent hopping even. We've got this thing in London. We've got this, incident in America with the nurse. I think it's, I didn't even think about tying Daniel Penny into this, but it's relevant that you mentioned that because that's what happens when whites react. People are always saying, oh, look at all these white cucks. Why don't they defend themselves? Why don't they do something? Well, what happens when you do defend yourself? And I don't know what it is with these blacks who just can't breathe, but it seems like you touch them and they asphyxiate. So, I don't know, but whether it's George Floyd or this Jordan Neely guy, so Daniel Penny does decide to be a Chad Aryan, and look what happens. So, of course, it's not just that whites are cucks, it's that why even bother? Just keep stum and hope for the best. Hope that you don't that he doesn't punch you, that the crazy black man doesn't shank you on the New York subway, or that the crazy blacks don't ruin your life because you tried to keep your bicycle that you paid for. Of course, people are just going to keep reacting like cucks. They aren't reacting like cucks. They're just trying to keep their skin. And so what happened in Spain, to tie this all together now, to go to yet another country, and why I want to talk about it is because I don't care actually now about white tears or white supremacy. And this is an interesting thing of when the situation is reversed, when there's a black so-called victim. We all know this, but for anyone who needs to hear this for the first time or needs to hear it reiterated, we live in an anti-white world. And if you want evidence of it, and of course, everything is globalized. Whatever happens in America, like we said, influences European countries to the extent that we've got English football clubs taking the knee in honor of George Floyd for years after the event of something that happened in Minnesota. So all this is globally connected. We're all living in this global culture, and the culture is anti-white. And the culture is negrolatry. It's idol worship, basically, of blacks on a pedestal, blacks and other minorities. Sometimes these minorities come into clash, whether it's the gays and the Muslims coming into clash. But basically, it's everyone else against whitey. And so when the so-called victim is black, it's very worthwhile to notice the reaction. So, the nurse gets her life ruined because she's accosted by 5 black men. Mizzy gets a slap on the wrist for threatening, harassing, abusing, and intimidating white people. And not only that, a slap on the wrist, he also gets rewarded, basically, with what he wanted, fame. Daniel Penny gets, who knows what's going to happen to him, punished for defending himself because, and other people on that train, because the victim is black. So the racial dynamic is, again, unavoidable. And yet, What happened in Spain last weekend was that a black Brazilian football player, who's one of the ugliest people you could ever imagine, he looks like a gremlin, he looks like a goblin, but he's a black Brazilian. So he's not even, he's African of origin, but it's not like he's from, the Congo or Angola. He's a Brazilian who is black. And he plays for Real Madrid. And last week, Real Madrid was playing against Valencia. And allegedly, this player, who's called Vinícius Júnior, was subjected to racist taunting and racist chanting from the Valencia fans. Now, Vinícius reacts, he chimps out, he freaks out. He has a meltdown on the pitch. And at one point, some Valencia players even tried to calm him down, and he's flailing around about so much that he actually even strikes his forearm into the head of a Valencia player and gets a red card for that, justifiably, which just adds to the drama, because now it's, the spin is that he got punished, he got red carded, even though he was the victim of this racial abuse. The referee of the match does what he's supposed to in these situations. He fulfills all the protocols, pauses the match. And, the situation just descends into chaos. Vinícius is hated in Spain, not because he's black, but because he is a provocateur. He's arrogant. He celebrates goals by dancing this trademark dance in front of the opposing fans whenever possible. He's very unsportsmanlike. He scored a goal against a team that is probably going to be relegated to the second division, and he scored by putting up two fingers to denote second division. Like, when you're playing for the top club in the world, basically, and you score against a meager little little farmer club that's going to be relegated, and you celebrate by rubbing their relegation in their noses, it's just, people are going to hate you for that. So Vinícius is actually hated in every away stadium that he goes to. And the only video I've seen of from the stands, from the stadium seats, of the crowd chanting, is a video in which the crowd is clearly chanting tonto. The allegation is that he was being called mono, which is Spanish for monkey. So the allegation is that they were making monkey chants. They were calling him a monkey. Now, that might not even be that racist, because he kind of does look like a monkey. And they also used to do this to Daniel Alves, another Brazilian who's like mixed race, but looks very much like a monkey. He just does. He's got big ears, a kind of squashed face. And famously, someone threw a banana at him, and he picked it up and ate it and got on with the match. But now we live in this crystal, fragile, snowflake generation. But it's not only that. It's that because of things like Black Lives Matter, and because of things like Mizzy being completely untouchable and allowed to get away with what he does with impunity, and because of blacks being allowed to accost a pregnant white woman, film it as she's desperate and overwhelmed with fear and emotion, and ruin her life, well, black footballers in Europe have caught on to this as well. I wrote an article on my Substack last year, and I'm going to write an article about this. I'm in the process of writing it. But the article I wrote last year was about the politicization of sport, and in particular, European football. The infestation of American wokery and progressive politics in football it's just astounding. You've got, during Pride Month, clubs are wearing rainbow-colored jerseys. In fact, again, the clash that this produces is that you had several players in France, African players, who might have been Muslim or simply, African Christians, but also they take their faith a lot more seriously than these European pretenders, who refused to wear these pride jerseys, and they were fined and benched and punished for it, and it created a lot of scandal. You've got rainbow-themed captain armbands I already mentioned all the Black Lives Matter nonsense. During COVID, when the stadiums were empty, a lot of stadiums just put up these big hoardings, advertisement hoardings. And in many stadiums, there was a giant part of the section that was blocked off with this massive Black Lives Matter hoarding. The English club Tottenham has the overhanging of the tunnel, and it's visible every match you watch of Tottenham, given the camera angle and the placement of this area of the stadium. It's impossible not to see it every time you watch a Tottenham match. It's decked out in the trans BLM gay flag, that abomination of multicolor pastel colors, right? And then, of course, this is also in American sports, whether it's the NBA or the NHL trying to do this anti-racism thing because there's only 3 black players, so we need to get more, even though nobody cares about the fact that there's only 3 white players in the NBA. Whatever. No one cares. But the fact that there's not enough blacks in hockey is a problem. You've got LeBron James. They've all become activists. And in European football, you've got all these anti-racism campaigns. In the Italian Serie A, there's something called Kick Racism Out. UEFA, the European organization of football, has this thing, say no to racism. There's a badge on every European football club's kit whenever they play a European Cup match that says, no to racism and respect and all this stuff. So the activism is off the charts. And yet, curiously, it only seems to be getting worse, this boogeyman of racism. It's kind of like how the ADL supposedly is designed. Its reason to exist is to, quell anti-Semitism, and yet all they ever do is complain about how anti-Semitism is on the rise. But of course it is. And of course racism is on the rise, according to these people, because an activist's job is to look for racism wherever it is. If you're an anti-racist activist, you will find racism wherever you can. You will invent it out of whole cloth. And then, of course, justify your very existence as an anti-racist activist by pointing to the racism that you yourself have dug up or invented or exaggerated. And players are taking advantage of this. One of them is a black Belgian. He's not Belgian, he's African, but he plays for Belgium, called Lukaku. He's always complaining about racism. He even sort of blackmailed or demanded in the European Cup, the Euros of 2020, played in 2021, he demanded that the Italian team, when they met in the quarterfinals, that they take the knee before the match because Italy wasn't doing it. Based Italians weren't doing it. And there is something to say about these based Mediterranean countries. The Spanish reaction to this Vinícius guy is very interesting. And I know I'm rambling here, but there's quite a lot to set up to explain here. So Lukaku blackmailed, pressured the Italians into taking the knee because he's now a self-styled anti-racist activist. He's a Black Lives Matter activist, and it's the same now with this Vinícius character. They've taken advantage of the coddling that they're given, that the pedestal that they're placed upon. And if it's true that the only thing that they were chanting at Vinícius was tonto, which is Spanish for fool or idiot, and yet he's going to say that this is racism. Another example that people are saying is that, Atletico Madrid fans hung a mannequin with a Vinícius jersey on it from a bridge, like the day before a Madrid Atletico derby. I don't know exactly if that's racism. It's just that they hate this player. And this kind of treatment against opposing teams' players is something that every top player has had to deal with. Every player gets insulted. Every player, especially if you are the best player on the opposing team, the one that's most likely to score a goal in the face of the home crowd that you're playing against, of course they're going to hate you. Of course they're going to call you maricon or fuck your mother or whatever. Okay? But the moment it's done to a black player, it's suddenly racist abuse. And it's also worth noting that the Real Madrid team is chock full of black players. But the only one getting this alleged racist abuse is Vinícius. If the fans were truly racist, and this is what Vinícius went on to say after the match, he makes this long post on all his social media platforms where he even says Spain is a racist country. Around the world, everyone knows that Spaniards are racist. La Liga has a racism problem. Spain has a racism problem. And of course, this means that all of the Spanish fence-sitters and centrists and conservatards, go on the back foot and say, no, we're not racist. That's unfair. You can't say an entire country is racist. We're not racist. Look how well we treat our immigrants and look how well we treat blacks. And you play for Real Madrid and make lots of money. How can we be racist? Instead of just saying, yeah, okay, maybe we are. Fuck you. Leave then. But there's black players on the Valencia team. There's other black players on the Madrid team. If these Valencia fans, or if Spain in its entirety, or La Liga in its entirety is so racist, why don't these other black players, why weren't they getting abused racially? Why weren't they getting chants directed at them? No, it's just your typical, the home crowd trying to put off the opposing team, and in particular, the player they hate the most. But then after the match, up go the placards, up go the social media virtue signalers, demanding that La Liga do more to combat racism. Vinícius himself comes out with the accusations. All of the Spaniards are racist. Spain is a racist country. Europe has a racism problem. European football has a racism problem. So despite all of this activism, the racism has just gotten worse. How is that possible? Because there's power to be gained in this. There's clout. There's victimhood points. And it's the same that we saw in the aftermath of George Floyd. Nike, Adidas, all of these corporations putting up solidarity, messages with Vinícius. Hate has no place in Adidas. Everyone welcome. Say no to racism. Rio Ferdinand going on these all caps, exclamation point ridden posts demanding that La Liga do something. And poor Vinícius, how can people watch this and not feel such anger at the racism that these poor black players have to go through? It's just, again, the usual charade that we see time and time again. And then La Marca newspaper dedicates the entire newspaper to not covering any of the football results, any of the Formula One, nothing. The entire newspaper is dedicated to anti-racist activist articles, with the front page saying a phrase that has now become well familiar in the godforsaken Anglosphere, which is, they said it in Spanish, but I'll say it in English because it's exactly the same. It is not enough not to be racist. You have to be anti-racist. So again, the global culture that we are all living in, whether you are in America, England, Ireland, Spain, Italy, it's all the same. And this is just another example of a white institution, a white person's institution, a European people's institution, whether it's, film that's been subverted and turned into a propaganda machine against us, music, education, and now it's football. The footballing institutions, English Premier League, Italian Serie A, Spanish La Liga, they're all being subverted by the usual suspects who have turned it into a propaganda machine and a field of activism, permanent fifth generation sociological warfare against white people, European people, to rob them of everything and to demonize them at every possible moment.
In the case of this football player, it's not like he's a poor, refugee from the Congo who used his savings to get to Europe. And, we're talking here about a guy who's a multi-millionaire.
Yeah, he's wiping away the tears. They're such actors. He like I mentioned, Daniel Alves. They threw up. This was many years ago. People who follow football will know it's a very famous scene. Someone threw a banana at Daniel Alves, this sort of pale-skinned, mixed-race Brazilian. He picked up the banana, took a bite out of it, and then went on and kicked the corner from the corner flag. Because in a lot of European stadiums, when you go to kick a corner, you're close to the fans. They insult you, they give you the bird, and in this case, someone threw a banana at him. He picked it up, took a bite, kicked the corner, got on with it. these are all multimillionaires. In this case, Vinícius breaks down in tears because, they chanted tonto, and he perceives it as mono. Because, again, like I said, the only video I've seen of the chants, they are clearly saying tonto.
Just to say, Pox, those
and
guys...
then, he's wiping away his tears at home with 500 euro banknotes. It's like, just get over yourself.
But those guys, I think some of those fans have been arrested, because I saw clips during the week, and it was some men in handcuffs. They're trying to make an example, I think.
So there's so much to talk about. This is why I'm writing a Substack about it, because the fallout from this has gone everywhere. There's a group called Frente Atlético, which is basically it's like a hooligan firm for Atletico Madrid. Famously fascista, hardcore. And they apparently did something, because Vinícius got his red card overturned, and now he's been allowed to play again. He should have been suspended for a match. Now he's going to be allowed to play. They overturned it because he cried, and everyone cried. The manager, Carlo Ancelotti, in his post-match press conference, didn't talk at all about the match. He just berated Spain for being racist. And Carlo Ancelotti is a guy. He's Italian. I respect him. He's back in my youth when I followed football, he was the coach of my favorite team, and he's regarded as a gentleman in football. And he's probably just doing what he thinks is right, to call out racism, stand against racism, the typical boomer, normie NPC position. Okay, so because of this reaction, Real Madrid gets its way, Vinícius gets his way, and I think what the Atletico fans did then to protest was like, I don't know, I think that was when they hung a mannequin with Vinícius' jersey on it from a bridge in Madrid, and I think those guys got caught, or they did that a long time. No, sorry, I'm getting things. They did that a long time ago, and the Spanish authorities must have known who exactly did it, but they didn't do anything. They didn't detain these guys who hung this mannequin. And this is what's causing lots of controversy. So they sat on it. And now that La Liga and Spain is trying to defend itself from these accusations of being a racist institution and a racist country, now, all of a sudden, how convenient, they've caught the guys who months ago, I think, or might have been even years, hung this mannequin. And those are the guys who probably have been detained. The other reaction, the other lawfare reaction, like you mentioned earlier, is that Brazil, Lula, is trying to apply some international law about like the mistreatment of Brazilians in foreign countries, and he's trying to like get these Spanish fans, these Valencia fans, extradited to Brazil, so they can face punishment for offending the well-being of a Brazilian abroad. So that's good to know, by the way. If you ever come across any Brazilians, it's good to know that this thing exists. I had no idea that basically Brazil has this thing where if you upset a Brazilian, some communist government can come in and punish you for it. It's like, it's very murky and kind of twisted, everything that's going on here. But again, put this all into the context of he's simply hated for being a provocateur. And he might not even have been racially abused. Again, the video that I've seen is that they're chanting tonto. Hanging a mannequin with his jersey on it isn't because he's black. It's because Atletico Madrid hates Madrid and hates Vinícius. They hate this player. Fair enough. A severed pig's head was thrown at Luis Figo when he betrayed Barcelona and signed for Real Madrid. In the first match he played, going back to Madrid's Barcelona stadium, as a Madrid player, the hated rival Madrid, someone threw a severed pig's head at him. Was that racist? No, because he's Portuguese and white. But if you did it to a black player, oh my God, could you imagine? Again, the black Twitter mob, the journos, the institutions would be all riled up because this is a power play. What's going to happen now as a result of all of this is surely during the offseason, all of the European leagues are going to pass more anti-racism policies. There will be more activism. more messages, more adverts with all the players saying say no to racism. All this stuff is going to be promoted and heightened and heightened and heightened. We can't just sit and watch the football and enjoy it. We can't just sit and watch a film and enjoy it. Everything has to be political all the time, everywhere. And everything has to be anti-white, because that is the main politics of today across the world. And players, like I said, are chasing this for clout, but they're also taking advantage of this as a competitive edge, because it's just going to make opposing stadiums that much less intimidating and uncomfortable. So there's all sorts of calls for the match to be not just paused, but completely canceled, forfeited, and the team whose players suffered racial abuse, no matter how dubious the allegation, was it mono? Was it tonto? What were they chanting? Who knows? Is it racist to say to a black player, go pick bananas? White people pick bananas too. Latinos pick bananas. People chant at players maricon. Basically that's a bundle of sticks in Spanish. They chant maricon, maricon. That's homophobic now. So that you can't say that. That's going to be a homophobic penalty. And God forbid there's a gay player, an openly gay player on a team. If you chant, hey, fuck, hijo de puta maricon. Oh, that's homophobic abuse. Okay, stop the match, forfeit the match, and award 3 points of victory to the team whose player was offended. That's genuinely being discussed.
In Mexico, when they have this tradition that when the goalkeeper, is about to do a goal kick, and he's standing back and he runs up to kick the ball, they start going puto, which is like gigolo.
Yeah.
And I think it was I don't know, was it the last World Cup or the one before, but Mexico was in hot water for being homophobic.
Yep. No, it was the Copa America or the Gold Cup. No, Copa America is South America. Central America is the Gold Cup. It was held in the United States. And of course, the United States is, woke epicenter, and Mexico is relatively based. So all of these Mexican fans were chanting their usual, chants that they don't care. They're not woke Western liberals, but this is a tournament held in America. And so there was a clash of cultures, but it's just funny to see.
It should be said, Pox, just to say, it should be said that the latest news is that the overwhelming majority of white supremacists come from countries like Mexico.
Oh yeah, we've outsourced white supremacy, and all the Nazis now are brown-skinned Latinos, or apparently Indians even now. I've seen some Indian drove a U-Haul truck with the only contents inside a very perfectly placed Nazi flag. It's just getting ridiculous. Now, I listen, I do want to say, I find a lot of the behavior of football fans to be just retarded. Football fans, especially like the diehard ones, aren't known for their intelligence. And I don't think that, going ooh, 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 when a black player is about to take a penalty or something is very good behavior. Also, all of these fans who chant at a player, who say, I hate you, die. Vinícius actually cited as an example of the racist abuse he's subjected to a video of opposing fans chanting, muere, muere, muere Vinícius. Muere is die. They were just telling him to die. Now, that's not because he's black. It's because they hate him. He's a cunt. Okay, fine. That's not racist, though. White players get that treatment, too. What annoys me about football fans is that they'll make these chants, but then, the summer transfer window opens, and that same player who they were chanting, die, we hate you, you're a bundle of sticks. If that player signs for their club, now, they'll be the first to go out and buy his jersey and, make a choreography in his honor. So it's a fickle mob, basically.
It's a bit like the Irish, football fans. They support English clubs, and they support these players week in and week out. But as soon as that player dons an England jersey, he's the worst person in the world.
Oh yeah, it's so typical. Or it's like in Italy, the football divisions are quite tribal, and you'll get all of these, players, Italian players, getting just subjected to the most vile abuse, not because of racism. It's Italian on Italian racism. Then, like, although there is a kind of species of racism directed towards Neapolitans, they get such a beating. Nobody likes them. They get really, really. It's almost like a type of racism. The amount of hate that the rest of Italy just drenches the Napolitani. Some of it does.
They consider them lazy. They consider them
all sorts of things, man. But then,
listen.
So
yeah, go ahead, Pox. Go ahead.
Will get abused, but then the second they put on the blue jersey for Italy, now it's all back them, cheer for them, celebrate when they score goals, etc. So again, football fans are just very fickle. But the point that I want to conclude on is that, and this is the reason why I wanted to mention this story with these others, is that even if some fans go ooh ooh ooh, or chant mono, or throw a banana, given the behavior of Africans, whether they are Brazilianized Africans, whether they are Africans, Black British, whether they are African Americans, Black people, given the behavior of them, given what you and I know about the behavior of Black people in our countries, in our societies, I don't care anymore if Vinícius was genuinely racially abused. And if he was so intensely abused that he genuinely broke down into genuine tears and really felt attacked and dehumanized, I don't care. I do not care. Because no one cares about white victims of equally, if not worse, racial aggression and abuse. And in fact, not only are the white victims of this racism, and again, I loathe to use that word because racism is just a weapon designed to do harm to white people. The whole term is just another anti-whiteism. But for brevity, okay, this racism against white people, anti-whiteism, okay, not only are the victims ignored, they actually end up getting their lives ruined. They actually end up getting punished in some way. So it's really hard for me to see videos of Blacks accosting a pregnant white woman. It's really hard for me to see videos of Blacks harassing, threatening, and abusing white parents of young children in their own home. It's really hard for me to see videos of Blacks stomping on a single white woman's car as she's driving through a bad part of town, as just happened a few days ago. It's really hard for me to see videos of Blacks chimping out all over European cities, destroying beautiful European cities. It's really hard for me to read about Black migrants raping and murdering the European women and children who have taken them in. So even if what happened to Vinícius or Lukaku or any of these other Blacktivist players is real, I don't care anymore. And the reaction from all of the Europeans, whether they be Spaniards or Italians, wherever these accusations are coming from, it's not really happening in England anymore because England has become completely subverted and taken over by, the anti-racism movement. But the based Mediterranean countries still have this kind of culture. They're kind of almost innocent in their racism. They think they can still, make some monkey chants or say, F off to a Black player without consequence. They don't know that, no, the culture has changed now. You can't do that. The Blacks are on a pedestal. But the response from Spaniards or Italians should be to simply say, we don't care. Take your Black tears and leave. You make hundreds of millions of euros playing in our countries, paid to kick a ball. If you can't handle abuse in an opposing stadium, then leave. And by the way, we aren't going to care until everyone else starts to care about the mistreatment of our people, of our kind, which is much worse. And just to conclude, we are approaching the 1-year anniversary of what happened last year in the European Cup final, the Champions League final, held in the Stade Denis in Paris, France. What happened? Blacks in France and Arabs, North African Arabs, Maghrebis, who identify as African in France. They form a sort of African bloc, even with the sub-Saharan Africans. They will take over metros and they will, chimp out shouting Ici, c'est Afrique, right? This is Africa, even though some of them are Maghrebi and some of them are sub-Saharan. But they are united in one thing, being anti-white. And they specifically targeted the white families of Real Madrid and Liverpool in last year's final. They targeted them for muggings, beatings, and they sexually assaulted women and girls in the hundreds. Rio Ferdinand did not make a single statement about that. UEFA did not make a single statement about that. In fact, the only reaction from an institution was the French government and the French media trying to sweep it under the rug, delete the CCTV camera footage of all these blacks and Arabs abusing white fans in the Paris metro, outside the stadium, etc. And then the French government went one step further and even tried to blame the fans themselves, in particular the traveling Liverpool fans, for causing all of the ruckus.
I think
until that gets addressed in a fair way with equal intensity, and Nike and Adidas and all these companies and corporations having the same reaction of abhorrence and disgust that they overflow with when a black player is allegedly racially mocked, then I'm not going to care, and no one should. No one should. Stand firmly on your feet and say, get over it. Get over it, you black crybabies.
I think Thierry Henry last year, I think he mentioned when he heard it was being held where it was, he said, not a good idea.
Yeah, but that's prior to the fact. Post,
yeah. He wouldn't go into it. He wouldn't go into why. He just said it's very bad neighborhood.
He said it's a bad idea. Ahead of the match, he said it's a bad idea to. He kind of, I believe it was on the American show which he presents, and so he was speaking English, and it was a brief moment on this show that he hosts with some other ex-players as pundits. It was a very brief moment. It was almost like a throwaway comment. He says, as an aside, they're giving their predictions about the final and everything. And he says something like, and I also hope, it's a safe match. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? And there's a bit of an awkward silence. And he kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, I just want to, it's a bad idea to have the match in this place of Paris. That's all I will say. It's a bad idea. And he didn't,
he didn't go into any racial aspects or anything like that.
And the subject was changed back to, let's talk about Liverpool's formation or something. And then after it all went down, and his concerns were completely justified, they didn't say anything about it. He didn't, explain, see, I told you so, and give a lengthy explanation as to what, this is why. And of course, he wouldn't have said it was a bad idea because white people were going to be targeted because they are white and vulnerable by non-whites. He would have just said, oh, it's a neighborhood full of youths, delinquents. He would completely ignore the racial element to it. And I did a whole live stream about this. It's up. It's one of the most watched videos I've ever done. And I gathered news clippings and video footage from all over France, England, the English reaction, English fans' reaction, and Spain. It was all three of the countries involved, the host country and the two teams and their fan bases. There were some players who said, it was hell. I can't believe what my family had to go through to get to their seats in the stadium. There were some newspapers who reported quite honestly about what happened, but it wasn't fully mainstream. And apart from the players who were basically just expressing concerns about the hell that their families had to go through to get to their seats in the stadium, or aside from some firsthand accounts that some newspapers published of fans who went through this hell as well, there was no institutional, mainstream, celebrity denouncing or outcry of this because the victims were white. But the second a black player alleges to have been racially abused, the system kicks in, the George Floyd system kicks in, and it doesn't matter now. It could be in America, it could be Spain, it's already been Italy. Lukaku has been, just basically bitching about this all the time. He plays in Italy. He gets abused because he's a striker who scores goals against the opposing team. And so people chant at him. And he says it's racist abuse. And like I said earlier, he pressures the Italians into taking the knee, even though they haven't been doing it and don't want to. It's nothing to do with them. He's an activist. He's like LeBron James in America, in the NBA. And so again, it's the anti-white system that is global. And it's global because all of these corporations and all these institutions are in on it willingly, in some cases, in order to get good ESG scores or whatever. And in some cases, they are bent over a barrel. Like, in reaction to this Vinícius thing, the Ministry of Equality, the Orwellian Ministry of Equality that we have here in Spain, which is headed by the most odious Bolshevik feminist called Irene Montero, well, she took to the podium to, again, blackmail La Liga and the Spanish government into taking more measures to quell racism, crush racism, blah, blah, blah. It's their cause du jour, and it will never end because they have to subvert and overtake everything. Everything. It is a total war strategy.
Yeah, on white people. It won't end until the last white person is gone from countries like Spain.
Gone, silenced, and has nothing which he can enjoy.
Yeah, and their history has been wiped out completely. Mm-hmm. I was going to say, Pox, we'll leave it there. I've enjoyed this chat. I will just very quickly shill my Substack. I'll put up an essay probably on Sunday. Pox, I'll leave you with the final word. Let people know where they can find you, talk about your Substack, etc.
Pox Populi is the Substack. I've had that for a little over a year now. Usually I write 1 or 2 long form articles on it. This month is winding down, but I am writing something about this scandal because I think it says a lot about where Europe is and where Europe is heading. I'm also back on Twitter. I was reinstated a few months ago, and that was fine because my account did really well and was growing, and it was fun to be on Twitter, and it seemed like you could ratio the shit libs, and it was I don't know, it was fun. But then that account got targeted by the hall monitors and was suspended. But I'm back on, so you can find me on Twitter at Pox's Foxes, spelled both the same, Poxes with ES, Foxes with ES. And then so I'm still on Telegram, of course. That's like the main central hub of everything. So yeah, that's the usual, still there. And then as far as last word, I think I've rambled a lot, so I've got nothing more to say.
All right, I'll say the last word. Pox is a fine, good writer. I read one of his articles there a few weeks ago about his getting kicked off Twitter for the second time. So I recommend people check that out, and obviously keep an eye out for his new article. All his channels and his Substack will be in the description of this video. Pox, thanks very much, and we'll chat again soon.
All right, thank you. Take care.